Order. I remind honourable members there have been some changes to normal practice in order to support the new call list system and to ensure that social distancing can be respected. I remind members they must arrive for the start of debates in Westminster Hall. Members are expected to remain for the wind-ups, providing there is space in the room. Members are also asked to respect the one-way system around the room, exiting the door on the left, over here. Members should sanitise the microphones using the cleaning materials provided before they use them and dispose of them as they leave the room. Members in the latter stages of the call list should use the seats in the public gallery and move on to the horseshoe when seats become available. Members can only speak from the horseshoe, and members are strongly encouraged to wear masks at all time in the chamber other than when they are speaking. Order Mr Jim Shannon to move the motion. Mr Shannon.
Thank you, Mr Chairman. I move that the persecution of Muslims, Christians and minority groups in India be heard today in Westminster Hall. This is an issue, Mr Chairman, that I have asked the Backbench Committee, and indeed I think it's taken an honourable ladies here as well, and honourable gentlemen who were also part of that application to the Backbench Committee, along with the honourable member in the front row here from the Labour as well, to ask for this debate. It's taken almost 8 months for it to come through here, so we're very pleased that it's now arrived. I see it's on the agenda today that debates in Westminster Hall will be suspended for a period of time, so maybe this will be, indeed this will be one of the last debates in Westminster Hall for this juncture of time until we get out, hopefully, the other side of the pandemic. I want to also, Mr Chairman, thank all right honourable and honourable members who have come here today to discuss the vitally important issue of persecution of Muslims, of Christians and other minority groups in India. It's something that's been in my heart for a long time. I think some of the correspondence we've got over the last period of time has initiated this debate and the need for it, and that's why I'm very pleased to be here and to be the mover of it. I am my party's spokesperson for human rights issues, and I'm also want to begin by registering an interest as chair of the APPG for International Freedom of Religion or Belief, and by reminding this House that the Republic of India is the world's largest democracy. These are all facts, by the way, they're not in dispute. It has a freely elected government and is not run by a nightmarish authoritarian regime like China, which arbitrarily imprisons millions of religious minorities, sponsors forced organ harvesting on an industrial scale, as we all know. And today in the Chamber, later on, there will be a statement by the Minister in relation to the Uyghur Muslims. It's a country with a rich and unparalleled history of religious plurality and coexistence, and we've always had a good relationship, United Kingdom, with India. Even today, hundreds of millions of people from different religions, backgrounds live together peacefully in modern-day India. However, the reason for this debate is quite clear. India is not perfect in terms of freedom of religion or belief, and there's been a concerning trend when it comes to forward violations, freedom of religious belief, over the past several years. This, of course, is not unique to India. Even in the UK, we have recently seen record highs for incidents of anti-Semitism, Islamophobia and discrimination against Sikhs and other minority groups. And still, the scale and trajectory of the persecution currently being experienced in India by non-Hindus is very worrying and very disturbing. I was talking to my honourable friend and colleague from the Scots National Party beforehand, and I was saying those from India have to be able to take what I would refer to, Mr Chairman, as constructive criticism, made to them in a friendly way, but nonetheless to highlight the issues that this debate has a reason for. And this debate will be done in the spirit of that. But I'm hoping that through this debate, and when the Minister and the Shadow Minister make their contributions, and others as well, that we'll be able to highlight the issues that we need India to address. Despite the Prime Minister Modi's pledged commitment to complete freedom of faith, in italics, since his election in 2014, there has been a significant increase in anti-minority rhetoric, the complete opposite of what was said in 2014. Including the BJP politicians. And some of those comments, and I'm going to quote some of them here in my contribution, Mr Chairman. India has also seen the rise of religious nationalist vigilante groups, growing mob violence, the spread of anti-conversion laws, worsening social discrimination, the stripping of citizenship rights, and many other actions increasingly being taken against religious or belief minorities. And it's totally unreal and unacceptable, and that's why we have to highlight the issue here today. According to India Spend analysis of Indian Home Ministry data, there was a 28% rise in communal violence between 2014 and 2017, with 822 incidents reported in 2017, resulting in 111 people being killed, 2,384 wounded. This is a very, very statement made by a recent Pew Research Centre report. It claimed that India had the highest level of social hostility and violence based on religion or belief of any country in the world. That's quite a statement to make. But when you look at the facts of the case, and that's why this debate's been held, they do rank as high as that. And their social hostility and their violence based on religion or belief of any country in the world. The COVID-19 pandemic has further exacerbated problems for religious minorities in India, and we get the comments and information. I get it obviously through the APPG, but I also get it from the religious groups. Christian Solidarity Worldwide is one example. Release International, Barnabas Trust, and Open Doors as well. And the Honourable Lady will be launching, I think, maybe tomorrow, the Open Doors strategy and culmination of what has happened in the last year. We look very much forward to that, because I believe that that launch will highlight not just India but other parts of the world where these problems are having as well. At the beginning of the outbreak, 24 Muslims missionaries tested positive for COVID-19 after an international event in Delhi. This led to accusations, Mr. Chairman, that Muslims were deliberately spreading the virus, and a campaign of Islamophobia in which Muslims were labelled, and I quote the words that they use, bioterrorists and corona jihadists, and discriminated against. The scapegoating of Muslims was picked up and supported by political leaders such as the BJP Minister for Minority Affairs, who accused the event organisers of a Talibani crime. Wow, what a play on words this is. At no level have they ever done that, and to suggest that they were going there to follow the religious beliefs and to worship their God, and yet they were made a target for it. Another BJP leader from Uttar Pradesh who advised citizens, do not buy from Muslims. I mean, where does this all stop, Mr. Chairman? And that is my concern about the whole thing. Furthermore, over 3,000 Muslims were forcibly detained by government authorities for more than 40 days under the guise of protecting public health. Well, public health is for everyone, and we can't blame one person for it, and they certainly weren't setting out to do it. And as a result of this stigmatisation, countless more instances of violence against Muslims in India have been recorded. So those 20 Muslims who were worshipping in the way that they were, in a careful way, and were then focused upon and made the targets of verbal violence, it also spread to other parts of India. One example, one attack which was caught on video, shows a Muslim being beaten with a bamboo stick by a man asking him about his conspiracy to spread the violence. Really? Because they're a Muslim, they're spreading the violence? No, they're not. And to say that is crucially wrong. Such violence is also suffered by other minority groups in India. For example, on the 3rd of February 2019, a 40-strong mob attacked a church in Karkeli village near Raipur. 15 worshippers were hospitalised after church members were beaten with sticks. Religious tolerance in the country of India, where they said in 2014 that they would have it, and the facts are that it's not happening. Similarly, on the 25th of November 2020, an estimated 100 Christians from Singwaram village in India's Chhattisgarh state were attacked as well. Christian Solidarity Worldwide sources report that a mob of around 50 people armed with homemade weapons attacked the Christians during the night while they slept. The mob burnt the Bibles and accused the victims of destroying the local culture through foreign religions. Again, I find this greatly disturbing, Mr. Chairman, and I find the whole thing very, very hard. I'm quite happy to go in.
Gregory Campbell.
I thank the honourable member for giving way and congratulate him and colleagues for their campaigning, as all of us have done on matters like this. As he outlines some of these issues, would he agree with me that one of the ways that we can address this is not just like debates like this that are exceptionally worthwhile, but encouraging others who have influence in the Indian subcontinent to also take these issues seriously, to lobby and campaign to the Indian government to ensure that the progress that the Indian people and governments have made in recent decades is stepped up and increased, and these sort of items that he has outlined are clamped down upon so that we don't see them in the future?
I thank my honourable friend and colleague for that intervention, and I very much wholeheartedly accept that. I will, Mr Chairman, and I think my honourable friend who's a spokesperson for the Scots Nats Party will also be doing similar. I hope to meet the Indian High Commissioner next week, along with some other individuals from Northern Ireland who have asked to speak to me. I feel, as I said earlier on, Mr Chairman, that when it comes to trying to make the changes, we do it in a way where we can make the change in a constructive fashion, and hopefully next week we can reinforce the point of view that my friend from East London Derry referred to, and try to influence those in positions of power to make the changes. It's all very well it's not very well, but when the attacks happen in the villages across India, they're sanctioned, at least verbally, or maybe by non-action by the police and army, and that sometimes encourages people to go ahead and do what they're doing. And no doubt that the 50 people armed with homemade weapons that attacked Christians during the night when they slept, burnt the Bibles. I mean, you might be able to burn the Bible and the Holy Bible and the Word of God, but you do not in any way stop the teaching of what the Bible tells us and how we should love others and should follow the truths that are in the Bible as well. Unfortunately, much of the violence against minorities is not appropriately investigated by government authorities. It happens all the time. It's so frustrating, Mr Chairman, whenever the police or the army stand back and don't act, or whenever they're told of what happened, they don't investigate to a full extent, where they can then catch those involved and have them imprisoned, have them taken before the courts, and they basically encourage perpetrators. In 2018, the Indian Supreme Court went so far as to urge the central and the state governments to combat lynching with stricter laws, and had to do so again in 2019 after no substantial action was taken. Again, we have it in all these debates, Mr Chairman. We have a verbal commitment to change, but we don't have any physical action to prove it, and that's what I find incredibly frustrating. In addition, Christian organisations have noted worsening patterns of discrimination against their communities in India. There have been reports of Christians who will not participate in Hindu rituals being denied employment. How often have we seen that? Because you don't conform to what government wants you to do, being cut off from the water supply and prevented from even burying their dead. I mean, these are cruel actions by those in power. Moreover, the 80-year-old Father Stan Swami, who's been an advocate for the rights of the poor and marginalised in India for 50 years, has been unjustly held captive by the National Investigation Agency of India for alleged Mayas links. I know the Minister will reply to this, and I would ask him perhaps if he's able to reply to me on this one. If not today in the Chamber, certainly to all of us who are interested, maybe he would tell us how we can help that gentleman get out of prison. Another issue is the spread of anti-conversion laws in India. These laws really make me very, very annoyed and angry. These laws are ostensibly designed to protect people, but often, in fact, they restrict the freedom of individuals to freely convert in denial of their right to freedom of religion or belief. If you want to be a Christian, you have a right to be a Christian. If you want to be a Muslim, it's your choice. If you want to be a Hindu, it's your choice. If you want to be a Jehovah's Witness or a Baha'i, or whatever it may be, or Coptic Christian. These are your rights to do that. And to have anti-conversion laws in India that prevent you from doing that, I find quite despicable. According to the US Commission on International Freedom of Religion or Belief, authorities predominantly arrest Muslims and Christians for conversion activities, whereas mass conversions to Hinduism often take place without any interference from the authorities. The double standards that they have. Empowered by the anti-conversion laws, and often with the police's complicity, right-wing groups conduct campaigns of harassment, social exclusion, violence against Christians, Muslims and other religious minorities across the whole country. And worryingly, because this law seems to be strengthening. 4 more Indian states are planning to introduce anti-conversion laws in 2021. In this year, more stringent laws to deliberately persecute and disenfranchise Christians and Muslims and other religious groups. If this happens, close to 2/3 of India's 1.3 billion people would be under some anti-conversion law. That's how far this goes, Mr. Chairman, and that's why it's so important to highlight it today. And before I finish, although I have a couple of pages to go here, I feel obliged to mention the Citizenship Amendment Act, or the CAA, as is well known, which was passed into law in India in 2019, and which provides a fast track to Indian citizenship for non-Muslim migrants from certain neighbouring countries. The CAA is very concerning because making faith a condition for citizenship flies in the face of both Article 18 of the UDHR and the Indian Constitution. And to say that and put it in law is wrong, which prohibit religious discrimination. Its defenders say that it's designed to protect minorities who've been persecuted in neighbouring states. Well, if you leave a neighbouring state where you're having persecution, you end up in India and the persecution continues, just under a different person or a different government or a different rule of people. Those can never be acceptable. However, this is difficult to accept given that the Act does not include the Ahmadiyya Muslims from Pakistan. And I want to make a plea for them today as well. I can't remember the honourable lady's constituency, and forgive me for that, but she has been a spokesperson for that on many occasions. And I know that she would ask me and others to speak up for the Ahmadiyya Muslims as well. Arguably the most persecuted minority group in that country. What about the Rohingya Muslims from Myanmar, who have experienced ethnic cleansing, potential genocide at the hands of the Burmese military? How many have not been absolutely cut to our heart by what has happened to them? Indeed, rather than seeking to offer Rohingyas a means to citizenship, a means to better themselves, a means of helping them, the Indian government has deported Rohingya refugees. The CAA is particularly concerning when it's considered in conjunction with the National Register of Citizens, the NRC. The NRC requires Indians to prove that they came to the state by the 24th of March 1971 or to be declared illegal migrants. When the Assam state NRC was released in August 2019, 1.9 million residents were excluded. 1.9 million. Why? Because they just didn't suit the form and the type of people that India wanted. Those included live in fear of statelessness, deportation or prolonged detention. They need protection. Again, the Minister in response hopefully will be able to give us some indication of what's happening in relation to that. The Indian government has plans to introduce a nationwide NRC in which the citizenship of millions would be placed under questions. However, with the CAA in place, non-Muslims would have a path to restore their citizenship and avoid detention or deportation, whereas Muslims would have to bear the consequences of potential statelessness. It just can't be right to have a two-tier focus upon those who are Christians, those who are Muslims, and those who are Hindus. This move bears worrying similarities to the plight of Rohingya Muslims in Myanmar, who in 1982 also had their citizenship removed and were labelled illegal immigrants before being demonised and then eventually attacked by the Burmese military. Those stories that we heard of the Rohingyas and what they had to go through were totally outrageous. I think they worried every one of us. They probably brought tears to our eyes. People were killed and butchered and abused and their homes burnt just because they were Rohingyas. If this sounds like an extreme comparison, I point my honourable members to the words of Amit Shah, the Indian Home Minister, who in 2019 described people considered to be illegal immigrants as termites and said that a BJP government will pick up infiltrators one by one and throw them into the Bay of Bengal. If that's not inflamed rhetoric, if that doesn't inflame the situation, if that isn't, Mr. Chairman, hate crime by the very words of a person in power, to have said that, I feel greatly disturbed, greatly annoyed, angered even, that any person in a position of power, like the Indian Home Minister, should say anything like that. To conclude, I would like to reiterate that India is a great ally of the UK. However, as an ally, constructive criticism amongst friends should and must be possible. We have to say the things that are factual. We have to come to this hall, in Westminster Hall, and to this House, on behalf of those who have no voice. Great Britain and our government and our minister work extremely hard to put forward the case on behalf of those across the world who don't have someone to speak for them, who don't have the rights that we have, who don't have the rights in their own country that they've lived for many, many years, and don't have the rights as immigrants either. It is our responsibility to raise the concerns, not only on behalf of the minorities who are persecuted, but for the benefit of all Indian and British people. And we say that because, Mr. Chairman, many of the people, the large majority of people in India believe in fair play, believe in the right to religious belief, but there are those who seem, in positions of power as well, who seem not prepared to do that. As the freedom of religious belief violations lead and have already led to domestic conflict, this is neither good for India's economic prosperity nor for the chances of a stable, long-term trading relationship between India and the UK. And we want to have that relationship, but we want to have a relationship where human rights are protected, where the rights of those of different religions have the opportunity to worship their God, and they can have the opportunity to work, to have houses, to have businesses, to have a normal life, and not persecuted because they happen to be of a different religion. Therefore, I urge the Minister to support his Indian counterparts to release the political, strategic and economic benefits of guaranteeing the rule of law and human rights. I also call on the Minister, who I believe is a Minister who wants to help, and his response, I believe, will reflect that, to include robust human rights provisions in any future trade and investment agreements with India. Because it's important that if we're going to have a relationship, and we want that relationship, Mr. Chairman, with India, that we have a relationship that reflects that. We in this country have high regard for human rights, for the right to worship your God as you so wish, to have the religious freedom that we have in this country. I believe that they should also have it in India. And for that reason, Mr. Chairman, I propose accordingly. I thank all right honourable members for coming. I've left them all plenty of time to participate. Mr. Chairman, thank you.
The question is that this House has considered the matter of persecution of Muslims, Christians and minority groups in India. Sir Edward Lee.
Well, I think we should congratulate our honourable friend for Strangford for ensuring that we have this debate and for the comprehensive way he moved it. We started having these debates, some of them instituted by myself, others by my honourable friend, I suppose 20 years ago. And I think we've made progress in ensuring that the government takes a more and more active role in these matters. When we started off, the governments were frankly careful to be very equidistant. They said on the one hand there's persecution of Christians, on the other hand that. The truth is that although in India the victims of persecution are overwhelmingly Muslims, worldwide the victims of persecution are overwhelmingly Christian. And actually the government in recent years has had the courage to stand up more and more for human rights and the right of Christians to profess their faith, and also the rights of people of other faiths to convert to Christianity. So these debates in Westminster Hall may not seem very important in the great scheme of things, but I think they're all part of a pressure on the government, and indeed I think there is a moral duty of our government to speak out, as for centuries, well certainly for the last century, this government has spoken out in favour of human rights throughout the world. Now, in a way, I hesitated to take part in this debate because India is an incredibly complex country with an amazing history. Hinduism is absolutely integral to India. 80% of the population are Hindus. Hinduism is the most wonderful religion. When you go to India, as I've been, you realise that it's absolutely part of the DNA of the country. And I don't condone Hindu nationalism in any way, but I do think we need to understand it, that Hindus feel that theirs is the religion of India. But having said that, of course, there have been Muslims in India for many hundreds of years, and presumably they will when they originally converted to Islam, they were living there in the first place. And the same applies to Christianity. Christianity is also integral to India. There's actually been Christians in India for the best part of 2,000 years. It's the third largest religion. There are 200 million Muslims, but there are still 30 million Christians. That's a huge number of Christians in the country. And according to legend, and undoubtedly fact, India was one of the first lands reached by early Christians. In Kerala, they date their Christianity back to the Apostle Thomas himself. And even parts of northeastern India have a Christian majority. So, despite the electoral success of Modi and the BJP, it has to be said that although Hindus are still the overwhelming part of the population, their proportion of the population has been declining, and no doubt this engenders a feeling of threat, which, dare I say it, I mean, I'm not here to lecture anybody else's country, but dare I say it, that nobody needs to feel under threat from Islam or Christianity in India. Hinduism will always be an absolutely integral part of the nation and overwhelmingly the majority religion. But despite that, perhaps for political reasons, and this is where nationalism is extremely dangerous, politicians around the world feel that they can use religion quite wrongly to promote themselves and to get into office and stir up their followers. And undoubtedly, we just got to accept this, and the government in its dealings, our government in its dealings with the Modi government has to accept it, that the BJP has sharpened its tone against India's religious minorities. There is absolutely no doubt of that. That is on the record. Between 1967 and 2026 states have introduced laws or ordinances aiming to stop conversions. It's a dangerous thing to convert to Christianity in India. But there has to be some equivalence too. Let's make absolutely clear that it's even more dangerous to convert to Christianity in Pakistan, even more dangerous. And we have to condemn absolutely this feeling in many countries of the world that it is wrong to convert or change your religion in any direction. And these ordinances and these laws, as I've described, are perversely often done under the guise of protecting freedom of religion. In 2015, Rajnath Singh, India's Minister for Home Affairs, called for a national debate on anti-conversion laws and said one was needed at a national level. Now, while the Indian government undoubtedly sets an anti-Christian and anti-Muslim tone, I'm not afraid, I mean, it's just a fact that violence and intimidation on the street level does the most harm, much more harm than the government or what it says. As Aid the Church in Need reports, and by the way, I'm closely connected with Aid the Church in Need, they do wonderful work throughout the world, and they should be congratulated for their very detailed reports. Their report said there was no sign of anti-Christian violence abating during India's COVID-19 lockdown. In the first 6 months of 2021, Indian NGO recorded 293 cases of persecution. Bishop Gerald Almeida of Jalabapur says, and I quote, "It is a cause of concern with the church because Christians are being killed and beaten. There are much more attacks than 10 years ago. Fundamentalism is a real problem," end of quote. Now, the Indian government's own figures, released in 2018, show an upward trend in interreligious violence. And one has to ask oneself, why is there an upward trend? Is the tone being set by government itself? In 2016, 86 people were killed in sectarian violence, 2,321 injured in 703 incidents. The following year, this rose to 111 people killed, 2,384 injured, 822 incidents in 2017. Between 2017 and the end of March 2019, there were more than 1,000 individual attacks on Christians. These attacks are also widespread. In recent years, they've taken place in 24 out of India's 29 states. In Odisha state, in May 2019, local officials sent a team of 50 workers to demolish a Christian school and children's hostel near Likapate. The school's application for recognition of land tenure was suspiciously lost. Hindutva nationalism is pervading the actions of many officials in the Indian government, from the ministers at the top to local government bureaucrats. Now, before I sit down, it would be quite wrong not to mention, as I think I've already said once, but I now emphasise that the overwhelming victims of violence and discrimination in India are Muslims. And this follows decades of discrimination. Riots in northeast Delhi last year resulted in Muslim homes and businesses being destroyed. Of the 53 dead from 6 days of violence, 2/3 were Muslims who had been shot, slashed, or set on fire. So, in conclusion, India is the world's largest functioning democracy, and we should be very proud of that. We are inextricably linked to India through our shared history, I agree not all of which has been happy or peaceful. With over 1 billion people, it's the largest Commonwealth country by a huge margin. On a number of fronts, India is a friend of Britain and a country with which we want to trade more and deal with more and to visit. But true friendship requires not turning a blind eye to each other's faults, and we must protest the violence in persecution in India today, and I hope that this debate is a small step in the right direction.
Barry Gardner.
Mr. Robertson, before I begin, I just want to say that I do resent having to come here this morning. I also resent that this will be one of the last debates that we're able to have in Westminster Hall. I believe that scrutiny is very important, and the scrutiny that we do in this chamber is very important. But I do believe that we should be able to do it remotely and observe the guidance that the government has given to others. Mr. Robertson, let me start by saying, imagine when the Windrush scandal broke in the UK in 2018, that there had been a debate in the Indian Parliament about the persecution of black people in Britain. Or in 2011, when the London riots broke out after the police shooting of Mark Duggan, if there had been questions asked in the Indian Parliament about the impartiality of the Met Police and how it was that they stood by and didn't use force to stop the rioters for 4 days before those riots were brought under control. Imagine that there had been debates in the Indian Parliament all through the Troubles in Northern Ireland, accusing the British government of persecuting the Catholic minority in Northern Ireland. I say this, Chair, not to minimise the subject which honourable members have brought for debate in this chamber today. Injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere. But I say it to give ourselves a sense of humility and a little perspective about how we might feel as parliamentarians if legislators in India were to pronounce on our institutions from afar, putting us under the microscope in the same way that colleagues are doing for their Indian counterparts today. Add to that fact that the UK is a former colonial power whose influence in what is now India, Pakistan, and Bangladesh was not entirely beneficent and certainly not above pitting one religious and ethnic group against the other. In this light, it's not beyond ordinary powers of imagination to conceive that people in India might not regard our intervention as either wholly welcome or appropriate. Indeed, many of my own constituents, British citizens, but whose families were originally from India, have written to me outraged by the very fact that we're holding this debate at all. If I read from just one of my constituents' letters, they ask, "It is a very difficult time in the UK due to the severe impact of the coronavirus pandemic. It's surprising to know that elected British members of Parliament are debating subjects attacking the government of India rather than focusing on UK priorities." Now, of course, there is actually a debate on COVID in the Commons chamber today, Mr. Robertson, and I don't think that we must confine our debates only to immediate domestic priorities. So perhaps, Mr. Robertson, I should have begun my remarks by declaring my interests. I am a Christian, and I therefore have an interest to prevent the persecution of my fellow Christians. But then I'm also a human being, and I've never understood how anyone can feel themselves honoured by the humiliation or let alone the persecution of their fellow being. I'm also the founding chair of Labour Friends of India, and as one of India's longest standing friends in the UK Parliament, I'm keen to see that the true nature of Indian democracy is properly represented and not distorted. I'll refer to the Honourable Gentleman's remarks later, but at this point, I'll continue to make some progress. I represent the constituency of Brent North, which only the member for Newham might be able to rival in the extent of its diversity of both ethnicity and religious faith. Perhaps 40% of the families in my constituency are originally from the Indian subcontinent. Many are Hindu and many are Muslim. And I'm equally at home visiting the mosque as the Mandir. As a Christian, I remember the appalling murder of the Christian missionary Graham Staines in Odisha. He was burnt to death with his two little boys, aged 10 and 6, when Dara Singh led a group of Hindu militants who set light to the van that they were sleeping in. I think I was the first person in this Parliament to raise the matter with the then High Commissioner, my good friend Lalit Mansingh. As a human being, I also remember that Dara Singh murdered the Muslim trader Sheikh Rahman, chopping off his hands before setting him alight too. Psychopaths and murderers exist in all countries. But when talking of persecution, it's important to examine how the authorities in those countries respond to such atrocities. The Indian Constitution is, importantly, a secular constitution, and it provides for protections of minority communities, including Sikhs, Muslims, Jains, Buddhists, and Christians. Though different political parties have formed the government since its independence, all have respected the Constitution and worked within its boundaries. So it's important to say that 21 years later, Dara Singh is still serving a life sentence for his crimes. And it's also important that he was convicted in the year 2000 when Atal Bihari Vajpayee was the Prime Minister at the head of a Hindu nationalist BJP government. In June 2017, in response to the growing violence of Hindu mobs known as cow vigilantes, it was the current Hindu nationalist Prime Minister, Narendra Modi, who spoke out against this violence and proclaimed that killing people in the name of protecting cows was criminal, illogical, and unacceptable. When the Muslim trader Alimuddin Ansari was later lynched by a Hindu mob for allegedly transporting beef, 11 people were sentenced to life imprisonment, including one local BJP party worker. This justice was meted out by a fast-track court and was the first case ever successfully prosecuted against such religious extremists in India. The state acted. It did not sanction the atrocities. Are there atrocities in India? Yes, they are. Are they often perpetrated against religious minorities? Yes, they are. Do they represent persecution by the state? No, they do not. Islam is the second largest religion in India. 40 million Muslims in Uttar Pradesh alone. 1.4 billion people, as the Honourable Member for Gainsborough spoke of. 1.4 billion people in India, with the second largest population being Muslim. And he spoke of 1,000 attacks on minorities. course, I give way to the Honourable Gentleman.
I understand the point he's trying to make, but what has not come across yet, unfortunately, and maybe I'll ask the Honourable Gentleman to reflect upon it, is the fact that of the legal system in India, and indeed the fact that 4 more Indian states are to introduce the anti-conversion laws. That means that 1.3 billion people will be under specific state law and state changes which disenfranchises them. The 1.9 million Rohingyas who haven't got the rights of citizenship. So when it comes to the points that Donald Jack was making, I understand what he's doing, but I have to say this: we're here to speak on behalf of those who have no voice, and today we're their voice in this chamber, and we should be.
Harry Gardner.
Well, look, I'm grateful to the Honourable Gentleman for making his points so clearly. And let me try and address them. Because the Honourable Member for Strangford spoke of Muslims being stripped of their citizenship rights. No. Actually, they're not stripped of rights that they never had. They were not citizens. They were classed as illegal migrants into the country. And we'll go on to talk about the Citizenship Amendment Act. It's very important when talking about India and religious persecution to consider the 2019 Citizenship Amendment Act. India is one of the world's top destinations for illegal migrants. Most of them are Muslims who come from the neighbouring countries of Bangladesh and Pakistan and are estimated by the Pew Research Centre to number 3.2 million and 1.1 million, respectively, from Bangladesh and Pakistan. The Act provided a pathway for illegal migrants to become citizens of India where they had been victims of religious persecution in either Pakistan, Bangladesh, or indeed Afghanistan. It established the important legal principle of non-refoulement by offering shelter to refugees who fled those countries due to discrimination based on religion. It gave this right to Christians, to Parsis, to Jains, and to Buddhists. Now, it was passed in both the Lok Sabha, where the BJP government holds a majority, and also in the Upper Rajya Sabha, where it does not hold a majority. But it sparked riots and outrage because the pathway was not open to Muslims. The argument applied by the Indian government is that these are Muslim countries, and therefore Muslims coming to India as migrants could not be persecuted religious minorities from those countries. Now, the Honourable Gentleman from Gainsborough spoke about Ahmadiyya Muslims. I entirely agree with him. They say that the legislation doesn't discriminate against Muslims per se. That's the argument the Indian government uses, only against illegal immigrants who do not have a well-founded fear of persecution in their country of origin. Now, there's a basic logic to that argument. I disagree with it. It is clear to me that if you are an Ahmadi Muslim, it is clear to me that if you are a gay Muslim, then it is perfectly possible, indeed highly probable, that you've suffered religious persecution in one of those countries. It is also possible that Christians or Parsis may have come without actually having a well-founded fear of being persecuted. They may simply be an illegal migrant rather than a genuine refugee. Better, in my view, that the law should not seek to treat illegal immigrants on the basis of broad religious categories at all, but to consider each individual case on its merits. But India is a sovereign country with an established democracy, and I respect their right to enact legislation, whether or not I think it clumsy or ill-framed. And as people criticize India for legislation that is giving citizenship to tens of thousands of illegal immigrants, perhaps we should recall that just in December, a British Home Office minister complained to the Home Affairs Select Committee that we had been unable to get the French to agree to a policy of turning back migrant boats in the Channel. As India enacts the principle of non-refoulement, we are busy trying to do the opposite. sometimes as a Christian, I think we would do better to cast out the beam from our own eye. Then we might see clearly to cast out the mote from our neighbours.
Just before I call the next speaker, I would ask if they could limit their speeches to 5 minutes each with 3 more speakers. Teresa Villas.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to serve under your chairmanship in this important debate. India is a vibrant, pluralist, secular democracy. Its constitution declares clearly that freedom of religion is a fundamental right. Article 15 outlaws discrimination on the grounds of religion, and a series of other articles provide further protections, for example, in relation to schools. These rights are safeguarded by respect for the rule of law and an independent judiciary, supported by bodies such as the National Commission for Minorities and the National Human Rights Commission. An enduring goal of the Indian state has been diversity and inclusion, and a National Minority Rights Day is observed every year on the 18th of December. The size of India's minority populations has been growing in recent years, and India is, for example, home to 16% of the world's Muslim population. Members of minority faiths have played a prominent part in India's history, and they continue to hold leading roles in Indian politics and public life, in science, in universities, in the law and other professions, in business, culture, and across the Indian economy. And let's just take one example, a symbolic example of in 2004, a Catholic Sonia Gandhi facilitating the handover of power to a Sikh, Manmohan Singh, enabling him to become Prime Minister with his oath of office overseen by a Muslim president, APJ Abdul Kalam. Now, as people in this room will know, I take very seriously matters related to freedom of religion, whether it's Islam or Christianity, and I've raised these matters in this House many times and will continue to do so. And in a country as huge as India, of course, sadly there will be lawbreakers who attack others, including members of minority communities and faiths. Sadly, no state can prevent all such crimes and tragedies, no matter how seriously they take policing and justice. And of course, there are hardline individuals in India who promote hate speech and division, just as there are in this country. Again, no democracy which allows freedom of speech can shut that down either. But I would argue that India's record on minority faith stands up to scrutiny. I do not accept that there's evidence of systemic or state-sponsored persecution of religious minorities. And when it comes to protection of freedom of religion and belief, I think the more important focus of this House should be on places like Pakistan, where forced marriage and forced conversion of young Hindu and Christian women is a very serious problem, and from where Asia Bibi had to flee for her life after years of imprisonment, or China, where incarceration and oppression of Uyghur Muslims is, quite frankly, a disgrace. Now, Mr. Modi's government has embarked on a huge reform agenda, tackling issues which his predecessors ducked because they were just too difficult. Change on this scale inevitably causes controversy and conflict in India just as it would elsewhere. All such crimes must be fully investigated to bring anyone responsible to justice. And in any democracy, there is further work to be done to safeguard and protect human rights and bring to justice those who commit crimes of violence against others, including religious minorities. So it will be important for some of the very serious matters raised in this debate to be considered in India. No doubt they debate similar matters in their parliament in the same way that we do. And those concerns raised by Open Doors and Christian Solidarity worldwide must be carefully considered. In a country as vast as India, with so many different communities, ethnicities and faiths, there are some tensions which are unavoidable, and it's a matter of massive regret that sometimes that can spill over into conflict and violence. But I would say the principles of unity and diversity have been a core aspiration and value of the Indian state ever since its creation. This is a country which is a stable and increasingly prosperous home to around 200 million Muslims and 32 million Christians. Whilst, like any country, its record on law and order and security cannot always be 100% perfect, it is still a huge democratic success story. Rapid economic development and government action is also starting to bring many millions of people out of poverty. So if we're considering some worrying points raised in this debate, let us also, Mr. Chairman, at the same time, remember the hugely positive progress in India, which is benefiting so many of its citizens, including millions from India's minority and minority faith communities. Thank you.
Naz Shah.
Thank you, Mr. Robertson. It's a pleasure to serve under your chairmanship, and I congratulate the member for Strangford for securing this debate. It is time the Modi government learned they cannot promote making India abroad while condoning the propagation of hate in India at home. These are not my words, but the words of Shashi Tharoor, an author and Indian politician, highlighting the reality of India under a BJP government. With the rise of nationalist politics all over the world, we have seen the threat to minority rights, and with Trump 2.0 in charge in India, in the form of Narendra Modi, we are witnessing before our eyes the scaling down of secular liberal rights that the Indian democracy once hailed itself for. Power politics has an interesting link with the legitimacy of an individual, and especially in the case of Narendra Modi, a man once barred from the US because of his alleged role in the 2002 Gujarat massacre that saw over 2,000 Muslims murdered and gave him the title of being the butcher of Gujarat in some newspapers. He is today invited on red carpets across the globe, including here in Britain. Narendra Modi doesn't just attract a nationalist crowd with his populist rhetoric, but he is directly involved. He is a life member of the RSS that is inspired by the likes of Adolf Hitler, Mussolini, and the ideas of an Aryan race. The RSS is built upon an ideology of superiority of Hindus, and within the group's mission statement, they call for the change in policy to the endless appeasement of the Muslim population. In reality, what they see as the ending of appeasement towards Muslims, the world knows it as ending of equality towards Muslims in India. Over the years, the mob attacks on Muslim communities in India has risen. Only last year, 5 Muslim men, severely beaten by police officers, were forced to sing the national anthem. 2 days later, one of the men, a 23-year-old Muslim, was murdered. Later, we witnessed a nationalist mob launch riots in New Delhi. Over 52 people were killed, hundreds injured, places of worship and property destroyed, and the majority of the victims were Muslims. But it isn't just extremist mobs that are changing the landscape in India. It is directly ingrained in the policies pursued by the BJP government. The controversial citizenship law and the national registration of citizenship directly discriminate against Muslims. The citizenship law ensures that Hindus and people of other faiths that live in India have an automatic right to citizenship, whereas Muslims don't. In fact, in 2019, the Home Minister Amit Shah said, "I want to ensure all Hindu, Sikh, Jain, Buddhist and Christian refugees that you will not be forced to leave India," outrightly leaving out Muslims. In the Assam province, a New York Times investigation has found Muslims have lived their entire lives in India with voter ID, birth certificates and marriage certificates being sent to a foreigners' tribunal to prove their citizenships. One man, Asabar Ali, due to a spelling error on the part of the authorities on his documentation, was sent to prison for 4 years. His family sold the house to pay for legal costs, and his wife committed suicide. The same investigation found 5 officials of those foreign tribunals, like Mamoni Kumari, claimed they were dismissed from their post because they accepted the citizenship of too many Muslims. If one believes the discrimination against Muslims in India is just hearsay, consider the words of an MP and BJP leader, Dr. Swamy. In defence of controversial citizenship laws, in an interview, he stated, "We know where the Muslim population is large, there is always trouble," adding, "If Muslims become more than 30% of that country is in danger." When challenged for his fateful comments, he asserted he was being kind to Muslims because not letting them into India, and that equality doesn't apply to them as they fit into a completely different category. With the Bishop of Troro's independent review for the Foreign Secretary in 2019 found the rising levels of hate and attacks on Christians on India, and the report itself mentions 750 reported cases of Christian persecution in India in 2017 alone. Recently, we have witnessed the use of brute force with water cannons on Indian farmers as well. They are mainly Sikh and other marginalised groups such as the Dalits. Those of lower castes or even non-religious groups such as humanists have often been at the forefront of hate and discrimination in India. India is at a pivotal point. Whilst their economic advance is set to lead them to become the third biggest economy by 2035, its political advance is set to eradicate the entire legacy of Gandhiism based upon a pluralist India. But the world is also at a pivotal point because nations like ours also need to make a choice between turning a blind eye to the Nazi-inspired ideology taking charge in ruling party of India in favour of economic trade, or we stand by persecuted minorities with very values of Gandhiism. If our words fall on deaf ears, then the world shouldn't be shocked if minorities in India are pushed towards a path of ethnic cleansing in the future. India has a choice to make, but so does the rest of the world.
There is an indivisible historic bond, as we've been reminded, between the UK and India, rightly admired as the world's biggest democracy, and its economic achievements have been staggering. My honourable friend for Brent North rightly paid tribute to the Constitution of India, drawn up under the leadership of Dr. B.R. Ambedkar, which says all persons are equally entitled to freedom of conscience and the right to freely profess, practice and propagate religion. It's a model for such a vast and richly diverse nation. But India is seeing growing violence against religious minorities. The Right Honourable Member for Chipping Barnet, I think this has been touched on already, is going to launch tomorrow, I think, the latest Open Doors World Watch List. For the last 2 years, India has been in 10th place on that list of the worst countries for the persecution of Christians, and the position is not going to improve, as I understand it, in the list being published tomorrow. Now, that would once have been inconceivable. 10 years ago, it was down at number 32. The current Indian government was elected in 2014. In 2016, Open Doors put India for the first time amongst the world's worst 20 countries, and the report that year referred to, I quote, a surge of militant Hindu pressure on religious minorities, most frequently Muslims and Christians. In 2019, India entered the worst 10. The US Commission on International Religious Freedom that year recommended that India be designated a country of particular concern. Human Rights Watch in that year reported that, I quote, the government failed to properly enforce Supreme Court directives to prevent and investigate mob attacks. And India remained in the top 10 last year. Open Doors reports 4 religiously motivated murders of Christians in the first half of 2020 and 8 just in the third quarter. We've been reminded that Christians and Muslims account for 20% of India's population. I paid a wonderful visit to Kerala in 2017. The location of churches established by the Apostle Thomas were pointed out to me. Islam arrived between the 12th and 16th centuries. Both religions have been very significant in India's development. The problem is, and this point has rightly been made, it's not that the state is perpetrating violence against minority religions, but to quote Christian Solidarity Worldwide, right-wing groups have been emboldened by a culture of impunity due to state negligence or complicity. Government inaction has meant that mob lynching against Muslims and Dalits, violence against Christians and against humanists are increasing. They're not always negligent, but they have often been negligent. A report from the London School of Economics, published at the end of 2019, documents WhatsApp vigilantes. It refers to more than 100 lynchings since 2015, many against Dalits, Muslims, Christians, Adivasis, carried out by, I quote, mobs of vigilantes who use peer-to-peer messaging applications such as WhatsApp to spread lies about the victims and use misinformation to mobilise, defend, and in some cases to document and circulate images of their violence. And we've been reminded that COVID-19 seems to have increased the problems. When our Prime Minister visits India, he must raise this issue when ministers, like the one who's with us this morning, visits India. I hope he'll meet religious minorities. That'll be a huge source of encouragement. Meeting in the USA and in India, Donald Trump and Narendra Modi have heaped praise on each other. We're seeing at the moment playing out now in the US where America First politics leads. Every community needs to feel protected. It's not enough just to protect only the majority, and the authorities in India do need to act against those who perpetrate violence towards Muslims, Christians, Dalits, humanists and other religious minorities.
Speeches. I'd like to leave 2 minutes at the end for Mr Shannon to wind up. David Linden.
Thank you very much, Mr Robertson. It's a pleasure to serve under your chairmanship. And I want to start by thanking my honourable friend, the member for Strangford, for leading today's debate on behalf of our APPG. And I think in paying tribute to fellow APPG members, may I also congratulate our honourable friend from Congleton on her appointment as the Prime Minister's Special Envoy for Freedom of Religion or Belief. I know that she has a personal passion for this subject, and I don't doubt at all that she will be an outstanding envoy for the government, so I wish her well on behalf of my party. Now, in the run-up to this morning's debate, I've got to say I've been absolutely fascinated, indeed quite perplexed by the knee-jerk reaction to this debate taking place, and I would say that extends as well to the honourable gentleman, the member for Brent North. If I followed the logic of his remarks that we shouldn't be interfering in the domestic politics of other countries, particularly other countries where the UK once ruled over, surely the same would be true of the United States of America, where I recall fairly recently that the honourable gentleman from Brent North had lots to say about George Floyd. The reality is that foreign affairs is a reserved matter for this Parliament, and it's entirely right for members of this House to comment on foreign affairs. Now, several honourable members... I'm very happy to give way to the honourable gentleman.
I don't have the moment that we should be engaged in foreign affairs and that we have the right to debate what we wish in this House. I didn't suggest otherwise. What I did say is that we should do so always with a sense of humility and appropriateness, and in this particular case, remembering that we had been a colonial power that had engaged in pitting one section of the community against the other for over 200 years.
David Linden.
I absolutely agree with the honourable gentleman, and that's a point I will echo later on in my own speech as well. But several honourable members in Westminster Hall today have been the recipients of emails from members of the Indian diaspora, the Indian High Commission, and even a member of the House of Lords, all getting excuses in early and suggesting that the issues raised in today's debate are perhaps overblown or indeed misplaced. In fact, only this morning we received, a number of us, an email being copied into the Standards Commissioner complaining that as a result of taking part in this debate that we're in breach of the MP's Code of Conduct, which is frankly nonsense, and I expect the Standards Commissioner will clarify that. Now, I, as a Scottish Nationalist MP, understand the optics of India's former colonial rulers being seen to lecture them on human rights and democracy is an irony that will not be lost in many people. But as I said earlier, foreign affairs is still very much a reserved matter to this Parliament, and it is right, therefore, that we comment, whether it's in India or other parts of the world, and I have no problems whatsoever in other parliaments commenting in our situation as well. But indeed, in the email that we received from the Noble Lord Ranger, we were reminded, if not rebuked, that India is the largest working democracy globally. Now, I've got to say, being reminded by an unelected peer about that being a democracy was certainly a novel experience, I will admit that. But Lord Ranger went on to say that, and I quote, "a free trade agreement is on the cards in the not-too-distant future." And he's right. It's precisely because India is the world's largest democracy and a country with which the UK seeks a free trade agreement that we're having this debate today and drawing into sharp focus violations of FORB and persecution of minority groups. Religious persecution in India is a topic that I've been following for several years now, but I want to draw attention to the House of the report from Open Doors UK entitled "We Are Indians Too." The report provided a sobering analysis of the escalating human rights violations against religious minority communities in India. Though religion-based violence has existed for years, analysis of instances since 2014 demonstrate that Hindu extremists have created an environment of hate and intolerance towards India's religious minorities, primarily its Christian and Muslim communities. This in turn has seen an escalation of violence, social ostracism, property destruction, hate speech, disruption of peaceful non-Hindu religious activities, and false accusations of conversion activities. But all of this has been compounded yet further by the emergence of COVID-19, and we've heard alarming testimony of Christians from different states walking hundreds of miles to Madhya Pradesh state, being denied rations and informed that they would not have access to assistance. Indeed, the Honourable Gentleman from Strangford has said already that Muslims continue to be targeted as a perceived source of coronavirus, and in many cases have been denied medical treatment as a result of this rhetoric. Now, just as I paid tribute to the work of Open Doors UK, so too I want to thank Christian Solidarity Worldwide for all of their advocacy in respect of India. And with your forbearance, Mr Robertson, I want to single out Joanne Moore, who has been instrumental in briefing me on FORB issues over the years, specifically on, but not limited to, India. Joanne leaves CSW this month and will be enormously missed by all of us in the House who have appreciated her diligence, passion and expertise. But the South Asia State of Minorities Report 2020, published just last month, paints a picture of spiking oppressive anti-minority politics, the criminalisation or descent of the deteriorating humanitarian situation within India. Mary Lawler, UN Special Rapporteur on the situation of human rights defenders, wrote, and I quote, "In India, human rights defenders and religious minorities protesting discriminatory laws and practices have faced restrictions, violence, criminal defamation, detention and harassment." She went on to say, and again I quote, "Other recent legislation limits freedom of opinion and expression in the guise of preventing disharmony and disaffection." So, the situation is grave, and the UK, I would argue, does have a role to play, because it's imperative that the Prime Minister's upcoming trip to India in the first half of 2021 is used to send a signal that an enhanced trade partnership between the UK and India will not be signed until real change is realised. Now, the British Government often comments that the UK has very constructive relations with India, and it's precisely, Mr Robertson, for that reason that we should be acting as a critical friend when it comes to advocating for minority groups facing persecution. Now, as with any negotiation, there are trade-offs, but turning a blind eye to the persecution of religious minorities should not be one of them. It must be the case that it remains a priority for the British Government, and this matter should be a red line in any future trade agreement. Now, last night the House had an excellent debate on the concept of Global Britain, and I made clear then, and I do so again today, that Global Britain is not the SNP's project. We wish it well, but we do not wish Scotland to be a part of it for obvious reasons. However, I would say in closing that an early first test for the approach of Global Britain is confronting the increasingly thuggish Modi regime, which has seen the oppression of religious minorities for far, far too long. Now, the Minister knows this particular caucus of MPs well enough to understand that we always put party and constitutional politics aside to advocate for international freedom of religion and belief. In doing so, though, we will hold the Government's feet to the fire as the Prime Minister departs for India on his trip this year. The success of the trade mission won't just be measured in the size or scope of a free trade agreement, but for me, the real measure will be whether or not members of this House are still raising concerns about religious persecution later in the year, and I very much hope that we won't.
David Kinnock.
Thank you, Mr Robertson, and it's a pleasure to serve under your chairmanship. I'd like to start by congratulating the honourable member for Strangford, who I thought gave a passionate account of his views on this matter, and other members who secured this debate, the honourable member for Glasgow East and for South Antrim. I'd like to thank honourable members on these benches for their contributions. I thought my honourable friend, the member for East Ham, gave a particularly compelling and balanced account of the issues that we're facing, and other contributors, and not least my honourable friend, the member for Bradford West, and Brent North, who made a number of very important points. Let me start by stressing that the Labour front bench stands firmly behind the rights of minorities to religious freedom, both in India and across the world. The Labour Party's new foreign policy puts the rule of law, democracy and human rights at the very heart of our agenda, and we're absolutely clear that religious freedom is a critical right that must be universally upheld. However, the wider picture is that, according to recent research by the VDEM Institute, for the first time since 2001, authoritarian regimes outnumber the world's democracies, and the number of such regimes is growing. That's why it's essential that democracies, of which India is of course the world's largest, must stand firm together in defence of universal human rights, and we must lead by example in standing up for freedom of expression and freedom of religion. These are the cornerstones of the values that we in the United Kingdom and particularly in the Labour Party hold dear, and they should be the values that democrats across the world also cherish. We have consistently stood up for religious freedoms throughout Asia. We've called on the UK government to take action against the Chinese government for its persecution of the Uyghur Muslims in Xinjiang by deploying Magnitsky sanctions against senior officials. We're also consistently urging ministers to defend the rights of minorities in Sri Lanka and to act in a far more robust manner than they currently are with regard to the appalling treatment of the Rohingya people in Myanmar. And the Labour Party has also stood up for human rights in India. We've stood by Amnesty International in India, which has recently been forced to discontinue its operations under what it described as persistent harassment from the Indian government. And I also recently expressed the Labour Party's strong belief that the farmers protesting in India must have the right to peaceful protest, and that the Indian authorities must commit to upholding this right. Again, UK ministers should be engaging far more actively and effectively with their counterparts in New Delhi in order to convey this message clearly. The religious rights of minority groups in India is a hugely important issue. For the 3 years up to June 2019, India's own National Human Rights Commission registered 2,008 cases of minorities being harassed. Every one of these events is heartbreaking. Firstly, for those who have been affected, in some instances even losing their lives and their families, but also for all those of us who wish to see India thrive as a nation. Religious minorities constitute 1/5 of the population in India, and Articles 29 and 30 of the Constitution protect the rights of those communities, including the right to use their own language and to form their own educational institutions. Article 15 prohibits discrimination on grounds of religion, caste, sex or place of birth. But in spite of these constitutional protections, in late 2019, the Indian government's Citizenship Amendment Act caused concern because it failed to state that it would offer a path to fast-track citizenship for Muslim immigrants, whilst explicitly committing to fast-tracking Hindus, Parsis, Jains, Buddhists, Sikhs and Christians from Bangladesh, Pakistan and Afghanistan. More recently, in late February 2020, New Delhi experienced terrible communal violence. The initial attacks were predominantly from members of the majority Hindu population who were attacking Muslim minority groups. The death toll reached 53. The majority who died were Muslims, but many Hindus also lost their lives, and parts of northeast Delhi were put under lockdown. Mr. Chairman, every section of the population is profoundly damaged by such violence and strife. Later in 2020, the persecution of Muslims continued with the blaming of Muslims for the spread of COVID-19, as many honourable members have mentioned. And as honourable members have also so eloquently pointed out today, the Christians have also suffered some persecution. According to Persecution Relief, between January 2016 and January 2020, there have been 2,067 crimes inspired by religious intolerance against Christians in India. India is the world's largest democracy, and as such it can and should take its place as a leader in global affairs and a shaper of the global agenda. It is also a hugely diverse rainbow nation, and as such it has an opportunity to be one of the world's most successful multi-ethnic, multi-faith and multicultural societies. I know that the vast majority of the Indian population, whichever race or religion they are, ethnicity or religion, they are rightly very proud of their country's vibrant diversity, and they are committed to principles of religious freedom that are so important in any healthy democracy. The Indian government has, of course, made some efforts to support minorities through its multi-sector development programme, with the majority of the spend going on education. And we are confident that these interventions will yield positive results. But in light of the above, we call on ministers to engage actively with their counterparts in New Delhi, to set out the role of the new Special Envoy on Freedom of Religion and Belief, the Honourable Member for Congleton, what she will be doing to encourage tolerance and inclusion, to explain the government's plan to compensate for the abolition of the Department for International Development, which has done some outstanding work promoting religious freedoms across the globe, and to explain the decision to renege on the government's manifesto commitment to spend 0.7% of GDP on development. Can the Minister tell us which DFID programmes for freedom of religion and belief will survive these swinging cuts? It is vital the government took a serious and strategic approach to defending religious freedoms, and we look forward to his answers on these vitally important issues. Thank you.
Minister.
Thank you very much indeed, Mr Robertson. A pleasure to serve with your chairmanship as ever. I'm very grateful to the Honourable Member for Strangford for securing this debate and the role he plays on this issue in this House, and I pay tribute to all his work as chair of the APPG for International Freedom of Religion or Belief. I'm also very grateful to all honourable members for their contributions today. The Honourable Member for Gainsborough, Brent North, Chipping Barnet, Bradford West, all made very, very thoughtful and insightful speeches here in Westminster Hall. And like the member for Brent North, I'm also a little bit surprised to be here today. But we are, and we have this opportunity to recognise and share the sense of feeling in this House about this vital issue. And I'll try and respond to some of the points raised later on in my speech. Now, the UK is committed to defending freedom of religion or belief for all. It's one of our human rights priorities. Nobody should be excluded because of their religion or belief. Discrimination, as we all know, does terrible damage to societies, and importantly as well, it holds back economies. You can't develop fully as a country or thrive while members of minority communities are oppressed. And this is a core message in our diplomacy, that communities are more stronger, more stable and more prosperous when they embrace their diversity rather than fear it. Now, in November, the Minister responsible for human rights, my ministerial colleague Lord Ahmed of Wimbledon, underlined our commitment to freedom of religion or belief, speaking at the ministerial meeting to advance freedom of religion or belief and the Ministers' Forum of the International Religious Freedom or Belief Alliance. And all honourable members here today will know that in 2019, the previous Foreign Secretary commissioned the Bishop of Truro to undertake a review into the government's support for persecuted Christians. And I want to assure the House and confirm yet again that this government remains fully committed to implementing all of the Bishop's recommendations and promoting freedom of religion or belief for all. And I'm delighted, I'm sure everybody gathered here today will be delighted that we have confirmed that my honourable friend, the member for Congleton, will continue this implementation as the Prime Minister's new Special Envoy for Freedom of Religion or Belief. And the honourable member, the opposition front bench spokesman, was absolutely right to raise this, as well as the member for Glasgow East. We did say in a previous debate here, I think it was the honourable member for Glasgow East, who was pushing on when this appointment was going to be made, and I'm thrilled that this appointment was made before the Christmas break, and I'm sure my honourable friend will do a fantastic job. Now, those of us that have had the pleasure of visiting India know that India is a magnificent country. It's one of the most religiously diverse countries in the world, boasting more than 20 official languages, over 1,500 registered dialects, very similar to Yorkshire in that regard, and a rich tapestry of religious minorities alongside its sizable Hindu majority. It is as well the birthplace of the other great religions of Buddhism, Jainism and Sikhism. And most notably in the context of this debate, it's also home to the world's third largest Muslim population, over 195 million people and approximately 28 million Christians. Shortly after partition, India's first Prime Minister, Nehru, said, "Whatever our religion or creed, we're all one people." This is the foundation stone of India, that regardless of religious differences, all citizens can consider themselves Indians. And Indians are rightly proud of their history of inclusive government and their secular constitution, which has been referred to by honourable members this morning. This guarantees equality before the law for citizens, just as we are proud of our own diversity and religious pluralism here in the UK. These shared values are central to the governance of both our countries. They lie at the heart of our partnership, which is further strengthened by the UK's 1.5 million strong Indian diaspora, the living bridge between us. As honourable members here today have noted, though, India does face challenges in enforcing its constitutional protections for freedom of religion or belief. Indeed, the situation for religious minorities across India varies depending on where they live, their socio-economic background, and how their numbers compare to other communities. Some have suggested that the UK turns a blind eye to these challenges because we don't want to criticise an important partner. I can assure the House this is not the case. On the contrary, thanks to our close relationship, we're able to discuss the most difficult issues with the Government of India and make clear our concerns, as they do with us, and as one would expect from close partners and friends. And during... Certainly.
David Linden.
Immensely grateful to the Minister for giving me, and I've got a huge amount of respect for him. Can I just therefore put in the record that when the Prime Minister sits down with President Modi on his recent trip, that he will raise this with him in person?
Minister.
Absolutely. The honourable member for Glasgow East is right to raise this, and I think there is a real opportunity when that trip goes ahead, not just to talk about what is incredibly important in terms of our trading relationship with India, but also put on the table the concerns we have around these issues. And in that vein, I can confirm that during the Foreign Secretary's visit to India in December, he raised a number of these human rights issues with his Indian counterpart, including the situation in Kashmir and our concern around many consular cases. And most recently, our acting High Commissioner in New Delhi discussed the UK parliamentary interest in minorities in India with officials from India's Ministry of External Affairs on the 4th of January. FCDO officials here in London also discussed the situation for India's religious minorities with the Indian High Commissioner on the 29th of December. And as Minister responsible for both human rights and our relations with India, Lord Ahmed speaks regularly to his opposite number in the Ministry of External Affairs in New Delhi and with the Indian High Commissioner here in the UK. Where we have concerns, he raises them directly with those authorities. Over the last 3 years, our High Commission has worked with local NGOs to bring together hundreds of young people of diverse faiths in 3 cities in India to work together on social action projects in their local communities, thereby promoting a culture of interfaith dialogue. Our diplomatic network across India also regularly meets religious representatives from all faiths to understand their perspectives. We use important milestones such as Interfaith Week to reach out to these communities. And in May, our High Commission hosted a virtual iftar, engaging over 100 Muslim and other faith and civil society contacts from across India, with positive media coverage reaching around 7 million people. In September, the High Commission, our High Commission, hosted a virtual roundtable with faith leaders from the Hindu, Sikh, Muslim and Christian communities to understand how faith groups in India have responded to the pandemic, to celebrate their important contribution in supporting local communities and promoting joint working between faith leaders. And this year, our High Commission will support an interfaith leadership programme for a cohort of emerging Indian faith leaders, including Christians, Muslims. This will hopefully create an opportunity for UK-India interfaith dialogue on tackling shared global challenges such as climate change, exchanging expertise on leading modern inclusive faith communities and promoting values of tolerance and multiculturalism. If I could just address a couple of points that a couple of honourable members raised. The Honourable Member for Strangford raised the issue, the case of Father Stan Swami. Human rights defenders make an essential contribution to the promotion of the rights of their fellow citizens, and we acknowledge they absolutely face growing threats, and the UK works with many international partners to support them. And through our networks of high commissions and embassies, we do that work. We've directly raised the case of Father Stan Swami with the Indian authorities. Most recently, on the 12th of November, we'll continue to monitor cases like this one and raise them directly with ministers where appropriate. With regard to the Citizen Amendment Act, Lord Ahmed has previously raised our concerns about the impact of recent legislative and judicial measures on India's minorities directly with ministers. On NRC, we've not, National Register of Citizens, we've not received yet any confirmation from the Government of India on whether an India-wide NRC will be implemented. We are keen to await details of any next steps that the Government of India may take following the NRC in Assam. So I'm conscious I have to give the Honourable Member a couple of minutes at the end of the debate, so if the Honourable Lady wouldn't mind, I just need to conclude. Let me end by saying we do acknowledge and we look to the Government of India to address these concerns and protect the rights of people of all religions. This is in keeping with India's constitution. And I have to say, a proud and inclusive tradition. So this government, our High Commission in New Delhi and our network of Deputy High Commissions across India will continue to monitor this situation closely. Where we have concerns, we will not, and we do not hesitate to raise them directly with the Indian authorities.
Okay, Jim Shannon to wind up.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Can I first of all thank all right honourable and honourable members for their contributions. Very much heartfelt. Some of them, to be truthful, I wouldn't be entirely supportive of, and I have to say that. But many of the ones, all contributions were made in the right sense of the word, and that's the important thing to say. One comment, it was every community needs to be protected, was said in the debate, and I think that's so important because every community has to be protected, and our role in this House, I believe, and in this debate today, was to speak up for those who haven't got a voice. We're speaking up for the 1.9 Rohingya Muslims, some of them living in India since 1971, who haven't got any citizen rights. We're speaking up for the 1.3 billion citizens in India living under new anti-conversion laws on behalf of the Christians, on behalf of the Muslims, on behalf of the Shias, on behalf of the Sikhs, on behalf of all people who do not conform or do not follow the Hindu religion. But I want to just thank the Minister very much for his response. And as Minister has confirmed what we all wanted to hear, and that was that government raises these issues regularly with them whenever the opportunity arises. And in reply to the Honourable Member for Glasgow East, the Minister confirmed that will happen whenever the meeting takes place. That's the answer we hope to have. And we thank that. And it's said in a way that is constructive and positive. And probably the Honourable Member for Gainsborough and the Honourable Member for Glasgow East would know if I was going to end these debates, I'll always end it on using a scripture text. Scripture text is from 1 Peter 5, verses 7 to 10. Just going to take 2 quotations out of it. Casting all your anxieties on him because he cares for you. The God of all grace has called you to his eternal glory in Christ to restore, to confirm, to strengthen, and to establish you. Today, this House in Westminster Hall has spoken up for those who have no voice, for those who have no one to speak for them. And we've done that, and we look forward to our government and to our Minister doing just that for each and every one of us. Thank you.
The question is that this House has considered the matter of persecution of Muslims, Christians and minority groups in India. As many of that opinion say aye. Aye. The contrary, no. I think the ayes have it. The ayes have it. Could members please leave promptly using the door on the left?